policy validated, I think last year. And then we also have a bill that's been thoroughly written and is currently going through the process of being enacted. I'm happy to say that at least we've had that development between the two IGFs. So that means someone is listening and progress is being made, which is fantastic. And we do recognize that. And I think we need to give a round of applause because we've been having a lot of IGFs. We write a lot of communiques, but I have to say it hasn't really been pushed through to the level of actually getting either regulations, bills, or policies being drawn. The fact that we had an IGF in 2022, and one of the takeaways from that communique was to come up with a data protection bill. And this was not only followed through, but a policy was drawn, a bill was written, and is currently going through the process of being enacted. We need to recognize that. I like pointing the finger at the ministry all the time, but I think also it's very important to recognize the achievements that they've made, and this is a huge achievement. So Mr. Director and Mohamed Sow, Ministry of Justice, thank you for following that and seeing that through. Job well done. In terms of the data governance aspect of the bill, I would want you to shed a bit of light in some of the areas that you feel were key during the validation process. ITAG was a part of that process, and so was the Cybersecurity Alliance and a few of the other representatives that are here in the room today. But I would want to know, maybe from the level of the Ministry of Justice, to share with us maybe 2 or 3 salient points that you feel, for the benefit of those that maybe haven't seen the bill or haven't seen the policy, what were 3 things that you felt were really very key and were important in terms of data regulation, data governance, that you felt is part of the documentation, and you would want to highlight that here in this August gathering today?
Well, like any other law, I mean, data is pretty much important because it's an issue of fundamental human rights. And we have a constitution which guarantees the rights of individuals, particularly the right to privacy, because data has, the right to privacy has the element of data. So having a legislation is one way of fulfilling the requirements of that law. But certainly in every legislation, there has to be an enforcement mechanism, which is one of the aspects of the data protection bill. We can make laws. For example, Gambia has so many beautiful laws, but when it comes to enforcement, it's always a problem. It's either the institutions are too weak to effectively carry out their mandate, or that we don't even have the platform for enforcement. So what the bill has done is to have a sort of a commission or an institution that would be responsible or is giving the mandate to ensure that data protection rights, data protection law is actually enforced in Gambia, and that every stakeholder who is engaged in either processing data or is a stakeholder generally, abides by the terms of the law. Because like I said, you can have a law beautifully written, but when it is not giving effect, it is as useless as that paper lying down there. So that's a problem we have in the Gambia. But I hope with the coming of the law, if National Assembly gives its blessing, we'd have a strong institution that would effectively enforce what those laws are. Another dimension I like about the bill is the fact that it has outlined the responsibility of those who take care of data. The processors, those who have it in storage. So the obligation is there is a streamline of responsibility, or sort of responsibilities that they have to comply with. And non-compliance with those basic foundational issues, there are punishments that are attached to that. Again, another fundamental part, which is it also recognizes the rights of the subject matter or the subjects of data, right? And that is important. That is the people themselves. At least if your right is breached under that law, you can go to the courts, you can go to a complaint mechanism where you can lodge a complaint and say, look, my rights have been violated, my data has been tampered with, or there has been non-compliance with the requirements of the law. Those are key takeaways, and the fact that it has also, defined what is data. taking into account modern trends in terms of technology and all that. So because if you look at our old laws, for example, the Evidence Act, the definition of data is only limited to, I mean, documents, physical paper. So we still have those issues, for example, in court, when it comes to admitting, let's say, DNA evidence. I'm sure the Bob Keita case has brought this out to the public. We don't even have a framework around it, right? Issues about even admission of email, because that law came into force in '94, right? So the fact that the data protection bill came out to define and expand the definition of what data really means, I think that would not only enable the protection of data itself, but even it will help in the prosecution of cases. I mean, I was following the panel discussion where the police were saying, well, we don't even have a law, we cannot even prosecute, and they are right. You cannot use a legislation that may not, or that is not ideal to prosecute, because if you're prosecuting, you're looking at a law. The law has to provide that this act is prohibited before you can prosecute. So I mean, putting the bill in a modernized fashion and in a fashion that protects, that expands the protection of data rights is key in the bill. Of course, I know it's still ongoing, in the undergoing review before it's sent to the parliament. But I would also say we must not do the process in the absence of the National Assembly, because they need to understand what the bill is about and what is the intention. Because if they don't understand, you send it to them over there, they may tamper with it. So that may not really get us on what we want. I think I just want to share some of those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. So. You just gave us a synopsis of the bill. Thank you. That was very helpful. And you highlighted a few things that I just wanted to touch a little bit on. Enforcement. I think enforcement is still a challenge for the police and all security forces when it comes to emerging technologies, particularly. And that was where I saw the connection point with these two sessions. That's why I said let's bring them together, because when we talk about emerging technologies and innovation, we're talking about new and upcoming trending technologies, which the enforcement mechanism is still playing catch up and will continue to play catch up with. So we need to make sure that that catch up is a very short time span and not 10 years behind, but maybe a year or two behind. But right now we're decades behind in terms of enforcement. So it's a struggle. So you have technology that's moving, forensics evidence that they highlighted, but you don't have the requisite laws to actually be able to admit those things into a court of law. So those are some things that are really very key, and I'm hoping that some of these things will be looked at. Amadou, one of the things also, a lot of the users of maybe mobile data or mobile phones or SIM cards, which is all of us, highlighted and welcomed, was that this policy or this bill will be looking at maybe data that they're submitting to these telcos, for example, and how this data is being used. If I register my SIM card at Excel, for example, how do I make sure that I don't get these unsolicited text messages of Wally Seka is playing at the dance at Coco Ocean? I'm not interested. These are some of the things that are really people highlight. The other brother is laughing. You like Wally Seka? But Amadou, I would like you to touch on that, or maybe Badara would also want to expand shade on that. In terms of protecting these unsolicited text messages and unsolicited being bombarded with all these spam messages, how is this bill taking that into account? Is that something that's being looked at under this?
Thank you, Madam President. So I think to begin with, in fact, even without registering your SIM cards, I think the operators should be able to send those unsolicited text messages as long as you are their subscriber. They don't need to attach sort of a name to that. They can just send bulk SMSs. However, there is a regulation in place that addresses that. Like you said before, our challenge has been enforcing regulations. But normally, as a subscriber, if I don't solicit certain things, I'm not supposed to receive them. However, some of those things are happening, really. But I think that is for our regulator to look into. Earlier on, we had a lot of people pouncing on them. I think those are some of the things. But as an official, I think, like I said before, I gave them credit. But back to the data protection, I think I want to start with the fact that, for me, there are a couple of takeaways. The fact that the whole drafting or the whole formulation process was actually led from our angle, but it went through a stakeholder consultation. We did not just sit in our comfort zones and draft policies or draft laws. We actually established technical committees and, of course, working groups of those committees that will tell us some of the critical things they felt were supposed to be are supposed to be addressed as a country. As a government, our concern has been, of course, where our data is stored. Is it internally or is externally? How do we classify some of these data? What are the definitions like the senior counsel here identified? This is that takes me to the to the drafting of the cloud policy. But like we said, in as much as you want all your data to be domiciled, you had infrastructure challenges. Obviously, you have to cater for that because there should be business continuity. You cannot hold institutions at ransom saying you cannot host your data on the cloud. When us as technical people, what we want is business continuity so that people should be able to, use these services, whether email or whether applicants to for passports or whatsoever service you want, or whether the health management information system. This is why we went to the extent of coming up with a cloud policy and strategy. When, as a government, we save stuff on the cloud, what kind of data should be on the cloud? How is it stored, and what are the sort of stakeholders that we engage in? These are some of the things that are on the cloud policy really. So also on the data protection, I think the council said we wanted to establish a full-fledged entity to handle the data protection. I recall we had engagements with one of the protection. I think she's the head of the data protection authority in Ghana. Yes, Teki. Teki told us Ghana, what they have is access to information and data protection, and they have two separate implementation. They have a challenge. So here, Gambia, we are about to start. I think the advice we got was, why don't you consider merging these two entities? We came back thinking, okay, you wanted to establish two full-fledged entities, but now someone who's actually doing it and has challenges is telling you, why don't you merge it? We did not just engage cabinet to do that. We also recalled the technical committee and floated this idea to the technical committee. What do we think? We want to merge these two entities because the thing is, access to information is actually asking for information. It's compelling government to provide the relevant information that is declassified and all those things. And data protection is actually protecting the data. So, but if you have these two entities together, it should be able to kind of dovetail. It should kind of sync. So then the committee agreed that we need to merge these two entities. And this was before the decoupling, because at the time, obviously, it was one ministry. But when the decoupling also happened, and then we felt, you know what, maybe the Ministry of Information, because the Information Commission is going to be under the purview of the Ministry of Information, and they may not be very, very technically savvy when it comes to data protection issues. So we wanted to change a little bit. But when we submitted to Cabinet said, you know what, no, I think your first suggestion makes a lot of sense. You still leave it with the access to information, and they can handle it, and we are working on that. So like he said, there is going to be a full-fledged entity to handle some of those things, and we still have currently our director of cybersecurity is the chair of the technical working group, and I think in fact they are currently in Burkina Faso on a meeting relating to data protection. So like I said before, our concern certainly is the residency of this data. Where is our data stored? Earlier this morning we spoke about the data we get that is generated from the airport and the different biometric data. Where is it stored? I think as a government this is a serious concern for us, and we want to make sure that some of these things are addressed in the policies and in the law going forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Amadou. Thank you. I'm gonna pivot a little bit and invite Badara and touch a little bit on work that's ongoing. I'm sure you all have seen Google Plus codes that you have on your gates. Yes, the letters and the numbers with the plus in between. You guys are sleeping. Blue color, you seen it? Great, excellent. Menge, what are you laughing at? I'm just making sure they're awake. So the Google Plus code, very interesting concept, novel at the time that it was being worked on. Badara, you worked with the ministry on that. And in terms of data that's being collected